we're the Crime Crib. My name is Kara, and I'm here with
Dayton
and Oliver.
And today we are going to be talking about the Dozier School for Boys, or also known as the Florida School for Boys. Warning, this is a very touchy subject that touches on sexual abuse, verbal abuse, and physical abuse. If any of these things trigger you in any way, I suggest clicking out now. The Dozier School for Boys is a reform school for troubled kids. Most were sent away for running away from home, having no place to go, stealing, or murder. Mostly just any boys who convicted any crimes got sent to this school. Dozier School for Boys was located along the panhandle of Florida in a very small town called Marianna.
It started on January 1st of 1900, and it got shut down on June 30th of 2011.
And Marianna is a very small town, kind of where everybody knows each other. So if any secrets get out,
everybody is going to know about it.
Yeah. For some time, the Dozier School for Boys was the largest juvenile reform institution in the United States.
And they also opened a second campus in 1955 in Okeechobee.
The founder and superintendent of the Dozier School for Boys is Arthur Dozier. There's not very much said on him, but we do know that he is involved with it because he is a superintendent, so he had to have known.
Seen some of the horrors that went on inside the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way he didn't, because you can't.
If you own it, you run it.
It's like if the president didn't know what was going on.
I just know he might have not participated in some of the things that we're going to talk about, but he still knew about it.
Yeah, in some way or some form.
Before we get started with everything, we're going to go and give you a little background on the school. So, before the school was actually called the Dozier School for Boys, it was originally named the Florida Industrial School for Boys, but then the name was changed to the Florida School for Boys. And once the Okeechobee campus opened up, that's when Marianna campus was finally changed to the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys. The campus itself consisted of 159 acres, while the property itself was 1,400 acres, which is a lot of space if you really think about it. So we were kind of confused, well, why do they have so much space if they have only 159?
Yeah.
Well, there was also a cemetery, so.
Yeah, there was wasn't there 2 cemeteries almost?
There was one cemetery, and then there was one unmarked cemetery.
And then there was also a lot of woods.
Yeah, so it was a big area. That means a lot of stuff could have went down.
So like we said, it was an 1,400 acre property. The campus mostly consisted of many large buildings that had stacked beds and windows. And there's also a small building on the campus called the Lighthouse. Keep that in mind because that's going to become really important whenever we start getting into this story. So, as you know, this story is going to be kind of touchy because we are talking about people going missing and stuff like that. So, keep in mind how that much space could
play a
help
role
out.
In some of them.
Yeah. What happened in the school? So, the original design of the school was to give the children training and education that would help them become productive citizens. Since they are troubled kids, maybe the school was supposed to be intended to help them move along, get out of that stage of their life, and just help troubled children who convicted any type of crimes.
And also some of the kids were, they were orphans, so they really didn't have anywhere to go, and this was kind of supposed to be a safe space for them. And they were supposed to learn something out of it,
But even though that is what they wanted to do with the school, that is not eventually what happened.
That was not the outcome for many of them.
So the school ended up kind of being almost a child labor, stuff like that. Anything that they could get help on, they would use the children for that. Without getting paid, without anything like that.
It was basically just a labor camp, but the name was just kind of like a
cover-up.
It was deceiving it. Because the name was Dozier School for Boys, but it was really just a large labor camp where a lot of abuse went down.
Right, but that's not the only thing that happened in there. There was also, a lot of abuse from the teachers, so-called teachers in the school.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of got, a kick out of it. It was kind of their fun.
They get some, sort of, sick enjoyment out of beating these kids.
Yeah, so it was really messed up. Back to the labor for the children. We do have a few little stories on what happened with the kids, and we're going to go ahead and get started with that.
Well, in beginning of the school had 2 fires that left the school $4,500 in debt. W.H. Milton, president of the school's board, authorized the purchase of brick-making machines capable of making about 20,000 bricks per day.
And those bricks, were they using those bricks to build the house, like build the school?
At first, it was to build the school.
Back?
Yeah, once they had, like, enough, like, you know, like, bricks and, like, not as many buildings as they wanted, they started selling them. And, like,
but then at some point, it was just a stockpile. Like,
Yeah,
they were
basically.
just used
Making money off of it.
Yeah, apparently the local demand for brick was a lot, and like the place where they were at was a very small city, and it's not much like industrial things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a big like farm.
Yeah, that's because up in Marianna, it's a lot of like open land and stuff like that. And if you really think about it, they could be making so much money off these children who are helping them do all this labor work while they're sitting there doing nothing, just getting more money in their pockets at the end of the day.
Yeah, in addition to the brick, 20 children, including at least 3 girls, also produced 1,500 barrels of corn, enough to feed themselves and the 48 hogs ready for slaughter. A few years later, the school superintendent complained that, quote-unquote, having so few inmates make the crops come in slow. And Milton asked the governor to also eliminate the $50 per head charge on the counties. Within a year, the number of inmates doubled, and the school started to turn into profit. Part of the profit came from working the children in the brick plant, and schoolrooms had no desks.
And that's crazy, too, because that even says that Arthur Dozier, he even said, because he's a superintendent, he even said that having enough quote-unquote inmates, in their words, are these children, that they don't have enough to help them produce the bricks, you know?
Well, yeah, I wonder what was the main goal? Because if they're not making any profit, like, technically, like, per head, so to say, because I know, like, schools nowadays, like, when you go to school, technically the government makes money off of you. I wonder how this, like, worked back then for them to, like, not make profit, or, like, what went wrong with that. In 1909, a legislative investigation committee found the schoolrooms had no desks. So apparently they weren't even learning. Like, all it was a big, like, labor camp, basically.
So there's no desk at all in here. It's basically just beds, bathrooms, and a whole bunch of stuff like that, you know? The name was a cover-up for them. They didn't need it.
It was basically like a holding facility. It was like a miniature prison, almost.
Yeah, just a place for for people to send their children if they were just too much for them, you know?
Yeah. They also worked the children to mine phosphate, timber, and resin for turpentine. Apparently, it was also a lot of African Americans there that they would also work.
It was more African American than white people because back then that's how things were. And we're going to get more into the story along, and you'll really see how the African Americans were very discriminated in the story.
Yeah, they were basically running the reform school as a convict camp rather than a school. In response to the investigations, which also found overcrowding, particularly on the colored side, and boys unnecessarily and brutally punished by a leather strap fastened to a wood paddle, quote-unquote. The reform school superintendent then made more excuses than changes. Well, apparently, superintendent was the owner.
Mm-hmm.
More excuses than changes. Technically, he knew what he was doing, even when, like, forming the school.
So his goal of the school was always just
profit. It was profit and just
for fun, you know?
Just sick beatings.
Yes. Children ran away with such frequency that boy hunting became a sport for the staff and other Marianna residents. They called it Boys on the Run, Get Your Guns. Bounties in 1961 could be $100 or a side of beef.
That's crazy.
That's just so sick.
That is so crazy that happened. Like,
because the staff were just betting on who could kill the most children.
Boy
like if they
hunting.
were runners.
Yeah, it's like it's very, very.
It's just
very
you
weird.
could tell off the rip they just had malicious intent.
And
the whole time.
It's so crazy too because if you really do think about it, a lot of these people, they're referred to as teachers. So to hear that they're doing something like that, literally like killing these kids just because they like the fun, like it's a game or something. It's just so crazy.
And people still at this point didn't even know this was going on. Like, this was still all behind closed doors. And really, this wasn't even unraveled until, like, the 90s? Maybe, like...
Well, the school closed in 2011. So
but
like,
everything...
more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, also says that residents in Marianna also participated in like boy hunting.
That's crazy.
So residents knew.
People in the area.
People in
But
the
no
area,
one came
like,
up with
close.
it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. As you know, the boys are ranging from age 8 to 21. But that's what the Dozier School for Boys says. But in reality, there's children as low as 3 or 4 in the school. And I think the lowest...
The youngest alleged student there was like 3 or 4. But I've heard there's victims from like the age of 6.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like little boys just getting brutally beaten. And there was even one that got shot.
Yeah. So the school could hold around 100 to 600 people at all times. So if there's 100 people, the school might not be as crowded. But if there's up to those like 600 people, imagine how much...
That's like even over max capacity.
Yeah, imagine how like worse the conditions are when you're living in that. Like you're so close, you have no space for yourself, you're crammed, stuff like that. So originally, when you're in the school, students are normally held for around 9 to 12 months or over a year. Another thing that they had in the school was a ranking system.
So basically, okay, so as soon as you get into the school, you're at a rookie level. Like that's not even the lowest it goes. That's the second level. And then you can get demoted just for little things like talking back or just being disobedient. The lowest level you can get is a grunt level. And that grunt level gets you sent to the White House, as we'll talk about later.
As you know, the school experienced a lot of abuse. So, to give y'all a basic rundown, if the boys acted up in any sort of way, backtalked a teacher, moved the wrong way even, they would get abused. And they would get abused by a specific teacher. And that teacher's name was...
Troy Tidwell. Troy Tidwell is known as the one-armed man. And... he wasn't the nicest, you can say that, because he would beat them the worst. And he only had one arm. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah, he was known as the one-armed man, as some of the students called him. And he was known as the worst beater they had in the school. He would take the children, and he would beat them with a strap until they cried.
But it's not even like he was just beating them. Like, the lashes would range from 35 to 135. So he's basically killing these boys.
Yeah, since the man only had one arm, they say that, or not even like with that, like let's say if you're blind or like deaf, your other senses and other things become stronger. Since this man only had one arm, that one arm was super strong compared to other.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically like 2 arms in one. So he was hitting the people way harder than he should have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the backstory with him, allegedly, whenever he was younger, he, I guess, leaned on like the muzzle of a gun and it shot his arm off.
Mm-hmm. Just absolutely blew it off. But his arm was very strong, and it gave some of these children that are in this school like the worst time they've ever experienced in their life.
I mean, do y'all think that's where all like the aggression started for him? Is whenever he lost his arm? Like, just since that point, he just kind of like, it just took something out of him. Like, it just...
I mean, maybe, but like majority of the people in this school were all the same, and not all of them like just had one arm. A lot of them were just sick.
Yeah, that is right. So, as we're talking about this teacher, he took the students to the White House. The White House is the detention center that is in the campus. If any kids who said anything the teachers thought was something to get disciplined were sent to the White House. The White House was an 11-room concrete building with 2 cells. One cell was for the black students and one cell was for the white students. This is when ever the school was segregated. So they had a white side and then a black side for the student. Another important thing about the White House is that there was not much in it. So there was a specific bed where most of the students were beaten. They would like lay the student on the bed and just
proceed to basically abuse him.
Yeah.
And with it only being a room with like a single bed in both rooms, there was one sole purpose for that being a room. Just for discipline. Just strictly discipline. And as soon as the boys heard they were going there, it would just struck fear in them.
Yeah. So the bed was photographed and written about to have blood, urine, and other things on it. The walls even had bloody handprints and blood splattered everywhere.
That's wild.
Yeah, everywhere on it.
And the sad thing is, most of the kids' nightgowns would just be ripped from all the lashes they got. That's just so horrible.
Like bare skin. I wouldn't doubt if they had scars from it, you know?
Oh, they definitely did. I read up on something that said some dude still has scars to this day from it. Like, just the beatings and the lashes. Like, that's going to stick with them for the rest of their life. And trauma-wise, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Apparently, since they did like to wear the gowns and everything, sometimes they have to physically peel the gown off of them because of how much blood, how much like beating pressure.
Because they literally like beat it into their skin.
Yeah,
like that's how bad it was.
Victims from the school said they remember blood on the walls, bits of lip or tongue on the pillow, the smell of urine and whiskey, the way the bed springs sang with each blow, the way they cried out for Jesus or Mama, the grinding of the old fan that muffled their cries, the one-armed man who swung the strap. So many of them remember him specifically.
And the fan the fan played a big role in it. So they would turn on the fan so that the students in the other rooms could hear the kid getting beaten. And there was even stories.
There were stories of where they could hear him across the whole facility. Like, you can hear him from the dining room. And it's just so sad because if you can hear screams over a big industrial fan, that's not good.
And, like, around campus. Like, imagine that.
Yeah, and then the students even said how if
Majority
they heard
students,
the fan.
Yeah, if they heard the fan, it just...
They knew it was about to happen.
Yeah.
And they would get scared and stuff like that.
Yes, one victim's name was Jerry Cooper. He was 15 years old when he was convicted of car theft and was sentenced to the reform school. He said that he did his best to stay out of trouble, but after several weeks, he learned about the beatings firsthand. School staff got him out of bed at 2 a.m. one day and took him to the White House, where he said they threw him on a bed, tied his feet, and began beating him with a leather strap. The first blow lifted me 1.5 feet off the bed, quote unquote. And every time that strap would come down, you could hear the shuffle on the concrete, because their shoes would slide and you could hear the swoosh, swoosh, bam. Cooper then passed out, but a boy in the next room later told him he counted 135 lashes.
That's crazy.
That's a lot. Like,
yeah, imagine like...
See, there's a difference between like trying to show someone a lesson, but you're just beating them for fun at that point. Like, they're just getting some sick enjoyment out of beating these kids. And I can't imagine anything that bad to the point where you'd want to beat a kid to death.
I know, right?
Just like that, in that fashion.
And they thought it was fun, which
but,
is...
like, they would beat them to the point where they'd pass out. You know what I mean? And that's when they'd stop. They wouldn't like, if they were still like conscious and stuff, they'd keep going. But at that point, Jerry, he said he passed out, right?
Yeah. He also said that we were not bad kids. We might have needed some help in some respect, but that wasn't the place to find it. I'll tell you that right now.
They really just needed this place for guidance, because these kids, they were, I don't want to say they were on the road to like a bad path, but everybody messes up when you're young. And if you have kids there that are at the age of like 8, bro, what can you do that's so bad at the age of 8 that you just need to be brutally beaten?
I know.
And of course we cover, or we're going to be covering a lot of young kids, how they grew into being murderers or something like that. But, I mean, that reform school was not the way. I really do wish that some of these parents didn't send their kids there, because they just didn't know what was coming for them, you know? And I'm sure if they did, they wouldn't have done it in the first place.
Some of the kids never got to come back home. Like, you're just sending your kids there like, oh, it'll be like a couple months, and then maybe they'll come back a bigger person, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just sad because they don't know what's on the other side of that door.
Yeah.
Majority of the time.
Yes, allegedly, whenever the kids would write their parents, sometimes the superintendent or the teachers, staff,
stuff like that,
they'll like take the letters and make them rewrite them if something
Yeah.
bad about the school.
That is a big thing, too, because some of the kids would write to their parents saying, Mommy or Daddy, these people are abusing me, these people are hitting me, I want to leave, I'm scared, and they'd go hit them again and tell them, if you don't rewrite this letter, then you're not going to see out of it.
Yeah.
But I remember specifically there was this one kid where he wrote, I deserve this, and then his parents never heard back from him, and I think the mother went up to the school and she was like, where's my son? And they're like, he ran away and we can't find him. Like, that's just so sickening, because at that moment they're believing you because he'd done that before. That was the reason he was in there. But it's just like they're being so just deceived.
Yeah, they probably also think that they know, like, because they think, hey, these are adults, they know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
schools, I trust my kids' life in their hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I sent them there for a reason, and it's just so sad to know that a lot of those kids were just sent there because they just needed a little help, and then they died, never seen again.
Roger Kaiser, a White House boy, formed the group the White House Boys in 1998, which were made up of former victims of the school and has grown to 400 members. He said, quote unquote, I know of one that I personally saw die in the bathtub that had been beaten half to death. I thought he'd been mauled by the dogs because I thought he had ran. I never did find out the true story on that. There was a boy I saw who was dead who came out of the dryer. They put him in one of those large dryers, quote unquote. He plays a really big role after the fact of everything that happened. He's
kind of a leader for these boys, like just guidance, because they all went through the same trauma or similar traumas, you know what I mean? And I think they all really needed this, and this needed to be like someone needed to speak up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was one of the first people to speak up, like, after everything happened, after he left, and, like, after it closed.
Because for a while, you feel like there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, right.
Because for a while, that you feel like there's nothing you can do, and you feel like if you do speak up, no one's going to listen because those are adults. You know what I mean? After you leave the campus, everything's supposed to be fine. You know what I mean? You go back to your parents, and even if you tell them, they're going to be like, well, has he changed? Like, you send them in, and you think they're still a liar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the reason they did go in there was for discipline.
On January 6, 2006, a 14-year-old boy by the name of Martin Lee Anderson had collapsed during a forced run at one of the state's juvenile boot camp. The local examiner ruled the boy had died of complications from sickle cell. After a video surfaced showing 6 officers swarming around Anderson, kicking him and forcing him to the ground, a second autopsy determined Anderson had died from one of the guards that had covered the boy's mouth and forced him to inhale ammonia fumes. So at first they tried to cover it up, saying that he died from sickle cell. But once they had proof that he didn't, they just changed the story. Anderson's death in the state's consensual death investigation made headlines, embarrassing the governor at the time, Jeb Bush. Troy Warren said that he and another boy were ordered to dig 3 holes behind the chow hall. They were to dig at night. Tidwell and another guard told them to make the holes 4 feet deep and as long as a boy.
Mm-hmm.
So if there already wasn't enough evidence, they killed 3 boys.
And that's crazy, too, because that's not the first time that they have made the kids, like, dig out these holes, you know? There's also another story about a man named John Bonner. So, until 1967, Dozier was racially segregated, like we said previously. They had separate camps, housings, and work assignments for the black and white boys. As John Bonner, 61, described, on the white side, it was more roomy. You had the industrial shops, the woodworking shop, places the white boy was able to get a certificate. Richard Hundley, 67, was 11 when he arrived at the Dozier and spent 2 years there. While white boys were given vocational work, Mr. Huntley said, he and the other black boys were made to work in the field picking and planting for state profit. It was kind of like slavery, is what he said. Mr. Bonner also said that he remembers the fear he felt sleeping in these locked rooms, knowing staffed and older boys were unlikely to abuse them at will. So that was another big thing that happened whenever the kids were younger versus older. Those older kids could hit the younger ones as much as they, like, whenever they wanted.
They had the freedom to do this with no punishment.
Mm-hmm. Because the superintendents and teachers and stuff.
These older boys had already gained, like, the respect and the trust from the staff because they've already went up the ranks. You know what I mean? They're not at a lower level rank where people won't listen to them. Now,
do you think they did it because they also got through all of it, or do you think they did it just to, like, not disappoint them, or do you think because some of them came there when they were really young? So maybe he was, like, raised to do it. You know what I'm saying?
I get that, but I think a lot of it might be to probably get the approval and, like, the moving up.
It's probably just to get more respect from the staff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if I don't do this, I'll be looked down upon and I'll lose my rank.
Yeah.
They're trying to get out of here as fast as they can.
Yeah.
Or maybe they gone, like, sick in the head, you know?
Well, I mean, they've spent so many years on campus. I think it's a mixture of the two because, one, they've been there for so long, they've grown up in this environment, and they're really a product of their environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they can't really help themselves. And maybe that's just that's all they've been taught to do. And then also just gain the respect of the elders, because you do not want to be trapped in here any longer than you have to be.
Yeah. One of the little boys who had to do one of the chores, take out the garbage and take the body to burial, he saw the hand in the garbage and he was like, oh my gosh, that's one of the people that's in here. It's like, that's one of their hands, and as a boy you're probably really shocked about that, but the teachers were like, if you say anything about this, you will be with him too, and that's really
super scary.
Yeah.
And a lot of the boys, they said that so you have friends inside there, of course, but one day you'd go to sleep and then the next you just wake up and that one kid they were friends with would never be seen again. And this happened to multiple boys, and
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, there is a lot of deaths, so that is where the graveyards come in hand. The graveyard's name was Boot Hill. Most of the time the graves were unmarked, so you could barely tell they were even there, Maybe if the grass looks a little different from digging them up, but sooner or later, along the years, the grass is going to grow back and you can't tell if anything's there. Outside of the cemetery, buried remains of about 55 students were found in the woods or brush areas. So that's not even including the unmarked graves. That is including outside of that, in the woods, along with that, the property they had, since it was so big, which is why, they probably needed all that land and stuff like that. So it's really crazy.
Along with the unmarked cemetery was a burial ground with several crosses stuck in the ground. I also read up that they found 33 of the crosses, and they dug them up, and that wasn't even the actual burial ground.
Really?
The actual burial ground was about, I think it was 50 feet away from all the crosses, and that's where they dug up most of the students.
Yeah, that's crazy. Right before the Dozier School of Boys was closed down, the Dozier became a fenced, high-risk residential facility for 104 boys aged 13 to 21 who has been committed by the court. So it kind of went down with the number of boys who was staying at the facility because, the years are going by. And this is already 2010. Can you even imagine that has been open for that long?
And also, this was only a decade ago. You know what I mean? That's just the crazy part, that it stayed open for so long.
Yeah, because, if you were to tell me about this story and tell me if it was in the 1900s, I would have been like, okay, well, that's a lot. That was a long time ago. But the fact that it was until 2010, we were born by then, that's crazy. We could have been there if we lived in that area.
But also, as in as you see, there's not as many boys there anymore. I'm thinking words were around by that point that some shitty stuff was going on there.
Their average length of stay at Dozier was 9 to 12 months, like we said. They lived in several cottages, with each boy having an unlocked room. On the other side of the Dozier School for Boys was the Jackson Juvenile Offender Center, a maximum risk facility for chronic offenders guilty of felony or crimes. It housed residents in single locked cells, like a prison. So yeah, that's really crazy, because now there's two. There's not just the Dozier School, but there's also the Jackson Juvenile School. So it's almost like the same thing, but just different branding. The Dozier's is supposed to be a school, but the Jackson Juvenile is a center, It's kind of different in that part. The school was open for 111 years until June 2011. The school failed state inspection in 2009, which ordered a law enforcement investigation after the allegations.
Decades after being abused at the school, men started finding one another on the internet and formed the White House Boys. They brought in press, but brought in more investigations. Different from past cycles, though, the White House Boys insisted that the place could not be reformed and had to be shut down. Their organizing and Ben Montgomery's reporting kept turning up the heat until the Department of Justice stepped in to take a look.
The White House Boys brought a lot of attention to the Dozier School, because then the word started getting out that there was these abusings and beatings and stuff like that. So, of course, that could bring in a lot of trauma for those people.
I mean, a lot of these boys had to live with this trauma for the rest of their life. Like, they went in as, like, young, innocent boys. Like, you know, they weren't perfect because they're in there for a reason. But also, they don't deserve all the things that were coming to them. Like, many of the kids, they didn't get to go home and see their mom or dad again.
The students who came out of Dozier were not the same people as when they went in. They were terrified. Most who did survive coming out suffered PTSD and alcoholism. So that is another big thing. Like, a lot of these students who did get out of the school had to cope some way, somehow, because they were just traumatized, you know? Yeah. So they a lot of people turned to alcohol once they, got older. And that could cause them just to, lose their mind, forget everything, which I'm sure is their goal. But, it's not, like, easy to live with that. And then the scars play, like, a big role in someone's life, too, because imagine having scars all over your body that just constantly remind you of what you went through as a child.
Yeah, like waking up every morning, you see that, like, in the mirror. Mm-hmm. You, like, remember after you try to forget every day.
Mm-hmm. And you just can't.
And some of these kids never got to live out, like, their, like, teenage years. Like, they were stuck in there for majority of their teenage years. Cause...
Yeah, they just never had, like, any fun. They
sat in that prison for so long that, like, they didn't know what life was like outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably a really hard adjustment from that to just living a normal life.
So after these allegations of physical and sexual abuse that was reopened by the White House boys, the school did end up closing. 55 burials on school grounds and 100 deaths that we know of in the school. That is what is recorded, But that's not, in my opinion, what is all out there.
I don't think that's the whole total.
You know what I mean?
There's definitely a lot more hidden bodies. I mean, if they made a whole, like, if they had a fake burial ground just to bury the kids 55 feet away.
And the woods.
And who's telling that they didn't dig up under the building? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's even more stuff to find.
Yeah, right.
But I don't even think they have the rights to dig under there, if I'm being honest. Because, like, then there's a bunch of legal stuff going on where they can't even dig up half of it.
Well, yeah, they have something to hide. Most definitely, the owner, or, like, let's say, like, an heir, or, like, relatives that don't want the name slandered. Like, yeah, you can't go under there because they know.
And majority of the people, like, staff and their family, like, they're gonna cover for them. You know what I mean? Like, they don't see these kind of people whenever they come home. You know what I mean? They don't see the devil they are inside the facility.
Yeah.
Whenever they come home, they're the most loving and sweet people. I wouldn't doubt it. But it's just, they're truly monsters. And it's sad that majority of them won't even get pinned for this because they're either dead or they're too old to even, defend themselves.
Like, basically, just, it happened so long ago, you can't really...
It's just, it took way too long for investigations to start happening.
You can arrest a 90-year-old man. I just don't know how much he'll be in there for.
What are you going to give him, a life sentence at that point? But, seriously, like, there's just... all the bad that could have been done has already been done. You know what I mean? You can't really save this by jailing them.
Yeah,
That's the sad part. And, like, I just really wish they would have done these investigations a lot earlier so some of these people could be pinned to these crimes.
Or, like, how many people would have actually lived?
A lot of kids would have lived. Mm-hmm. That's the sad part. And, like, they'll never get that justice. And the families, they're still searching for some of their kids' bodies so they can have proper burials.
Oh, yeah. Like, a proper, like, closure, like, what happened to them.
They'll never know. That's the sad thing. And, like, and I feel like majority of the people that heard, oh, my son ran away,
they probably didn't believe
they're never going to find their body. They're never going to find that body. And now that all the stuff's coming up, they're like, holy shit. You know what I mean?
And that brings us into what I was going to say. So 7 DNA matches and 14 identification of remains were found. And the law enforcement will continue to work on identifying these bodies, but, it takes a while, especially since this happened so long ago. Some bodies are going to be newer. Some are going to be older, of course, because it just went on for years. So some of the older times, like, where these kids were killed, of course, their bodies are going to be harder to identify. And it was also seen that 3 times as many black students as white students were buried at Dozier. So, as those 14 bodies were identified, there was also 27 more graves found in 2019. Since the Dozier School was closed, the White House was sealed off and turned into a memorial plaque. So they closed off the school. They gated it, no trespassing, anything, and then they made that White House where, most of the kids did either die or got the worst pain in their entire lives. That's where they can now be, like, memorialized, so they can finally, like, be represented for those families who had to go through what they did.
They can get some kind of closure just knowing that door is just locked forever. You know what I mean?
Because it was just...
And it probably gives them some sense of power now that, like, it's closed off, and I'm just glad it's a memorial now.
Or at least, like, security, because now they know that, future generations, that's not going to happen.
They don't have to endure that same pain.
Yeah, they endured.
And from now on, the school has been closed, and I'm sure some people probably go and, try to...
There are still investigations.
Stuff like that. And then you probably have those kids or, people trying to break into it, because they think it's cool or they want to, like, look at it. And so I just really hope that doesn't interfere with them finding and identifying some of the bodies. But that's all we got for you guys today.
I hope y'all found this as interesting as we did. And
I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's a very hard subject to talk about. Thank you so much for watching and listening to us. We are the Crime Crib, and we'll
see you later. Bye.